Hello. This morning I paid a visit to three relatively local secondhand shops, one of which is probably one of my favorite places to go because it usually has decent stuff, and the shop actually has other bits and pieces that I like looking at, and it's usually not too um, scody, if you know what I mean. Grimy, the shop. It's a little bit nicer. And I found this. Now I picked this up based purely on the cover art. There's something I like about still life images of fruit, which is not really a it's a pretty common artistic trope, isn't it? Like what are some other like the Melvins album Bullhead? Is it Bullhead? I think it's Bullhead. Also has a still life image of fruit captured on the album cover, and yeah, something about it. There's a famous artist, a Spanish artist, painter from about 100 or 150 years ago, which might be more like 200 years ago, and you might recognize. I can't remember his name. Probably should have looked before I talked about this, but he does paintings of fruit, and then the background is always black. So imagine this: the grey is this black, and then the kind of the colors of the apples or the oranges kind of pop a lot more on the black background. Anyway, do you recognize this? Maybe you're looking at this and go, I know that album. I didn't. So I looked. It's by the band Phoenix and is the album Bankrupt. I've heard of Phoenix. I've heard a couple of songs of theirs. So this was really very much a gamble buying this. You can see it's $3, which is a little bit more than the average secondhand CD I buy. The song I know by Phoenix is the song off the Lost in Translation soundtrack. So that's got to be over 20 years old now. When the Lost in Translation came out at about 2003, 2004. And that's a pretty good soundtrack. I think I've talked about that before on this channel. It's got some good songs: My Bloody Valentine, Kevin Shields, Air, Square Pusher, other things I can't think of at the top of my head right now, but it's a pretty good soundtrack. It also has a song by Phoenix, Too Young, which if you've seen the movie Lost in Translation, you'll probably recognize that song. And I like that song, but I've never really listened to much else by Phoenix. I've heard the odd song here and there, so I picked this up. Like I said, based purely on the cover art and the fact that I'd heard of Phoenix. This came out in 2013. Phoenix are a French band. They kind of do indie pop, synth pop type music. And I listened to this in the car on the way home, or at least I listened to the first half. And so I heard Entertainment, The Real Thing, SOS in Bel Air, Trying to Be Cool, and Bankrupt. I haven't heard the last 5 yet. The first four, at least, were pretty much in the vein of what I expected from them. Nothing really amazing or great, to be honest. Some of them were like, okay. The song Bankrupt, which is the last song I heard before I turned the car off and came inside, actually was the most interesting thing. That seemed to be a instrumental song, or at least the part I heard. Oh no, it looks like there are lyrics to it, so maybe I only heard the first part. There's something about this band that I don't like in their image. I was just reading something, and on just before I started this, kind of a review. It wasn't of this album, it was one of their other albums, and the reviewer evoked Coachella in a kind of negative way, and saying that this band Phoenix fits into a Coachella-esque image, which is, I could understand that, even though I know very little about this band and I've never been to Coachella. I could understand what the reviewer was saying there. There are certain bands that have, I don't know, I can't really explain it. Almost like a hipsterish, even though we don't really use the word hipster anymore, do we, to talk about that if you went back about 10 or 15 years, that hipster-ish, we're so cool, but at the same time, we don't show it. Yeah. Whatever. That's how I there's the kind of their music puts across that as well. You know the band what's the name? MGMT. They have a similar sound. I think a much more interesting band in MGMT, but come from a similar kind of area artistically to Phoenix, but MGMT have a more real, down in the dirt type image. Their music feels like it comes from somewhere more real within themselves. Whereas Phoenix, that doesn't seem to be the case. It seems like, maybe it's because they're French. Maybe that's why. You know, sometimes these kind of cultural subtleties that you don't always understand coming from another culture, and so you might write it off as this or that, but actually coming from their culture, it's not intended in that way. So maybe I'm being unfair, but anyway. It was $3. It's not bad. I need to listen to it more. I haven't finished listening to the whole thing. And I kind of just bought it because I felt like buying something. Yeah. The other thing I bought, like I said, this secondhand shop has other bits and pieces. And another thing I've never talked about before, but I also, and this is really boring, I know, and maybe a little bit embarrassing, but I collect maps, old maps. Not super old, kind of, you know, not any particular vintage, to be honest. Kind of maps I find interesting. I'm probably a little bit autistic when it comes to maps, as in I just like looking at them. I'll kind of open a map and just stare at it for kind of, not hours, but for a long time. Especially places that I don't have to have been there, but maybe historically or just something I recognize the names. I was looking at a map the other day. What was it? What was I looking at recently? Somewhere in America, some state in America where I've never been before, but I kept on recognizing names from, like, maybe they were mentioned in a song, or I recognize it from a historical event, or from reading a book or something like that. Since I was a kid, I've really liked maps. And so I've got a box full of probably, 50 maps of different places around the world. Sometimes they're kind of tourist maps. Sometimes they're more like this one's a topographic map of Auckland, my hometown. But the reason why I got this one, because I got a lot of maps of my home city, but the reason I got this one is it's from 1998. 94, 98, which is when I was a teenager, and so I'm kind of really interested to see how much things have changed in the intervening 25 to 30 years. I'm not going to show this, I'm just going to fold it out to show what it looks like. I'm not going to go into detail, I'm sure no one wants to see that. Here's half the city. And the other one I got was South East England, the Midlands and East Anglia. Again, this is the kind of thing that would be interesting for me, because that kind of southeast area of England, so many, kind of a lot of it links back to music. So many, they're my two great loves are music and history. And so many kind of little towns and villages and cities in that area kind of connect back to things in history or in music. Like, as an example, I'll just open it up and see what we see. So this is probably going to be a huge map, so I'm not going to be able to fold it out. Yeah, see, this is massive. But here we have, this looks like the Midlands. Milton Keynes. There's for if you're a music fan, you know a lot of bands have played at I think it's the Milton Keynes Bowl, or they've got a big kind of concert venue there, an outdoor concert venue. I think they have one of the festivals there, maybe the Download Festival they had. I know they had that at Donington for a long time, but they may have also had it at Milton Keynes. I know Green Day have a live concert movie from playing at Milton Keynes. What else we got here? Oh, something just went off there. Cambridge, obviously a very famous university town, but also where Pink Floyd are from. Peterborough. The band, what was their name? The London Towers, I think we're from there. And there's a famous, this was from years ago when YouTube would have first started. There was a video of them walking around Peterborough. And if you know the London Towers, they were kind of like a punk band, but in the vein of looking like Motley Crue, with the teased up hair and the very tight jeans and the kind of glammy punk. And they got into a fight with some chavs in Peterborough. They're going down the main street of Peterborough. Nottingham. Who's from Nottingham? I know there's a venue in Nottingham that a lot of bands play called, is it Rock City? Whenever you see a band touring England, they always call into Nottingham and play there. London, Staines, LEG, Slough, of course, The Office. We go down here to Crawley, and what band, or especially what guy from what band do you think of when you think of Crawley? When I hear that, I think of Robert Smith from The Cure. Well, not just Robert Smith, I think also Lol Tollinghurst was from there as well, and Simon Gallup, maybe. Certainly, The Cure is kind of seen as a band that started in Crawley. Guildford, the Guildford Four. And how many bands? Dartford, who's from Dartford? When you think of Dartford, who's from Dartford? Mick Jagger and Keith Richards. I might not be 100% correct on this, but I'm pretty sure Mick Jagger and Keith Richards met waiting for the train into London at Dartford Station. Gravesend. Now this is not music, but if you've ever seen the movie by Terrence Malick, The New World, which is basically the story of Jamestown in Virginia and how the British settlers interacted with the native tribes there, and the real Pocahontas, you know, she was a historical figure, married John Smith. No, it wasn't John Smith. It was the other guy, Rolfe. Whatever. He took her to England, and she got sick on the outward passage. They were leaving London, going down the Thames, and they had to stop at Gravesend and offload her because she got very, very sick, probably smallpox or something like that, or some influenza, or that. There was obviously always some issues with that and the native kind of novel viruses. I think she's buried there. I think you can still find her grave. Basildon. What do you think of when you think of Basildon? Depeche Mode. That's where they're from, in Essex. Watford. Elton John was the director. I don't know, he was not the actual day-to-day working director, but kind of like, what do you call it? Like the when you're given a title as kind of like an honorary. He was an honorary director of Watford Football Club, because that's what football club he supported when he was a young man, I'm pretty sure. Oxford, Radiohead is the band I think of when I think of Oxford. Bournemouth, Isle of Wight. I think there was a famous festival in the 60s or 70s, the Isle of Wight Festival. Like the Who, didn't the Who played there, I think? Portsmouth, Southampton, Bognor Regis, Brighton. The Battle of Hastings, 1066. There's Battle there. You know who's from Battle? Keane. You know that band Keane? You don't really, I don't know if they still exist. Remember about 2003, 2004? They were kind of if you're, I guess within certain circles, they were a British band, and they that song "Somewhere Only We Know," which has been used in so many TV shows and stuff. So even if you don't know band Keane, I'm sure you probably know that song. They're from Battle, and I remember quite a funny, I don't know, a memory I have of that is that they were kind of public school boys, like upper class, and the singer, I think his name was Tom. It doesn't really matter what his name was. He had to go to rehab for something. They became famous, and as happens so many times, that he got in, I don't know, whatever, drinking too much or too much of something else, and a member of another band dismissively said he's gone to rehab because he's got a port addiction, meaning port, the wine. And when you think of port, it's kind of like a something that, again, the upper classes drink. A port addiction. I always remember that. Thought it was quite funny. Bristol, way over here. And we think of, there's so many bands from Bristol, but I get Massive Attack is the one I think of the most. Portishead, I think, are from Bristol as well. There's actually a town called Portishead near Bristol. If I looked around, I could probably find it, but I'm sure I could go on and find little bits and pieces of towns and things from movies and history and bore you all to tears. But so just a kind of an insight into something else. And when I say collect, I'm certainly not as avid collector of maps as I am of CDs. But it's something that if I see them around, I'll usually pick them up. Or sometimes someone's getting rid of them. I don't know if they still do this, but National Geographic magazine, do people even buy magazines anymore? I don't know. But when people did used to buy magazines, and National Geographic was kind of like such a mainstay of you'd find them everywhere. Doctors' surgeries when you're waiting in the waiting room, or dentists, or I think at one stage my family had a subscription to National Geographic, or at school you'd find them at school or in libraries, and there would, certainly when I was a kid, there was always a map inserted inside as a giveaway. And so say if this particular National Geographic, the cover story was about the Persian Empire, archaeology in the former Persian Empire. And so they would have a map of Iran. That would be and maybe one side would be modern day Iran, and on the other side would be archaeological sites of Persia, the Persian Empire, the greater Persian Empire. And so I've got a lot of National Geographic maps as well, old ones from those. Anyway, I'm sure that was particularly boring, but anyway, we'll leave it there. Thanks for watching.